Tonight we're working on Chapter 11, and the focus of Chapter 11 is working with jQuery. But really we're not just learning about jQuery, we're also learning about a couple of other tools that are built into Visual Studio that you will use often as a professional developer if you work in a .NET environment. These are the topics for the chapter. You can see we'll start talking about what jQuery is, then we'll talk about the Nougat package manager, and then how to actually apply jQuery to do things, and also use jQuery to do validation. And that sounds like a pretty simple list, but it's actually quite a comprehensive list of things. The author begins by talking about the fact that we learned about JavaScript in some of the earlier chapters. And granted, this is not a course or a book about JavaScript, but you'll see that JavaScript is kind of, integral to a lot of web development. And yes, it is a client-side programming language that can work in conjunction with ASP and C#, which are server-side languages, and you can use all of them together. Now, JavaScript has been around a long time, and you can do some pretty fancy things with JavaScript if you know how to code your way around it. Over the years, many people have developed entire libraries of functions and packaged them together, and by far the most popular of all the JavaScript libraries is jQuery. Some people will call it a framework. That's true. It is really a library, though, because basically they have a bunch of pre-built functions and methods and objects that you can just leverage by just calling upon them, by simply creating a link to a jQuery repository. jQuery is not the only JavaScript library out there. There are many, and there's many that are growing in popularity. Some that you might want to investigate beyond jQuery might be something like AngularJS, for example. That's one that's really popular. Node.js is another one. That is actually a server-side version of JavaScript. That one's growing in popularity pretty hugely as well. Remember, the advantage of JavaScript, and therefore jQuery, is that it is something that executes in the client browser. So the user does not require a connection to the server to get the programmatic functionality of the language. If you can download the code for the page, it's embedded within and it'll just run. So the advantage of that for both the user and the developer is that you're able to do things that are very dynamic and sophisticated without requiring server-side interaction. So it makes things a lot more efficient. It gives the user much more immediate response to things they do on the screen, and it also unburdens our servers from having to do communications back and forth to do simple actions. Now, we learned about server-side validation in earlier chapters, and one of the things at the tail end of this chapter is where we're using jQuery in the browser to kind of buffer that before it even gets to the point of doing the validation on the server. And that's a very common technique. jQuery has been around for a while, and if you're curious, they do have a website, and I'm just going to go to that right now. You just go to jquery.com, and you'll see that jQuery is completely open source. If you're interested in grabbing the jQuery libraries, they have all sorts of download areas. Typically, you would just come here and just grab this version and go. But there is a pretty extensive collection of jQuery libraries. It's not just one library. And all the libraries come in both what we call a standard format, where you, like, if you opened up the code and looked at it, you go, aha, that looks like JavaScript. I see what that's doing. And then it comes in the minified version. And what minified means is they take all the variable names and function names, white space, indents, all those things, and they strip it out and make it super, super efficient and condense it down so that instead of maybe being 10,000 lines long, it's only 3,000 lines long, and therefore loads faster and executes even quicker. So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. If you're interested in exploring information about it or looking at the documentation, this is a place to come. And one way that you would work if you were an open source developer very often is you would come here, you would download the Jquery libraries, and you would just insert them into your folder structure for your project. And then you just create links from your pages to the scripts, and they work. That's one way you can do it. So it's kind of a manual process. But when you work with Visual Studio, you have this beautiful advantage that there's tools built in that can pull Jquery in automatically for you. And that's one of the first things we're going to learn here. All right, but going back to what Jquery is, Jquery, once again, is a library. And one of the things that it's used for very often is to make things more interactive, and basically to improve the user interface. So, and really all those things can also be done with JavaScript, but the syntax can sometimes become very complex, and some of the tags that you use can be several lines long just to do a simple little function. So what somebody did is they wrote this library so that I can use a simple command like fade, and it fades. You don't have to write all the code to go with it, you just have to put in a couple little parameters and it works. If you're interested in just studying Jquery in its like native sense, of course W3 Schools is really one of the best places to go. And you'll see they have a whole section here on the left for Jquery. And I'm going to show this to you just real quickly. And I'm going to go use their Try It Out editor to do the demonstration. Now, you know, I mentioned that you can go to the Jquery website, you can download the libraries, and you can put them into your project folder, and then Jquery is there. Another option that a lot of people choose to exercise is this approach, where they don't even bother downloading the libraries and including them. They just link to one of the public repositories, and Google has a big collection of them. And you can just drop a line like this into the head section of your document, and it'll form that connection with the libraries that are out on Google's public servers, and you're just utilizing the libraries that are out there. So that's an option for you as well, and I know the book talks about that. But let's take a look at what Jquery actually does. Notice that Jquery will run inside of a script section if it is embedded onto a web page. Like JavaScript, though, it is often a better idea to take Jquery and put it in a separate file, but it does work both inline and embedded on HTML documents. All Jquery statements will be prefaced with a $sign. It's an indicator to the compiler that's, I'm going to strike that word, not the compiler. It's integrated into the engine of the browser that interprets JavaScript, that Jquery commands are coming once they see that $sign. Immediately following that $sign, you're going to see that there's parentheses and then something inside those parentheses. What goes inside that first set of parentheses is what we call the selector. What's neat about the selector is it uses the exact same syntax that you would use for CSS. So if you wanted to apply some Jquery to a paragraph tag, inside the parentheses you put P inside of double quotes. And it tells it that it's looking for a paragraph tag. Same selector you would use in your CSS document. Now any of the syntax that you would use in CSS to do a selector can also be used here. So that's kind of interesting to know as well. So if you had, you know, paragraph.nth child, you know, some like really weird :hover kind of thing, it would do it. It would do all those things. So it uses those selectors exactly. As is very common with Jquery, often what you'll do is you'll attach something to something that you've selected, and then you run a function. Often those functions become unnamed because they run brute force. We call those anonymous functions. They don't have a name, they just execute. We don't need to call them, they just run. All right, so whenever you see a function without a name. But it also can have a name and you can call upon it. But in essence, it allows for a couple of really powerful features that JavaScript in and of itself doesn't allow for. One of those things is chaining commands. So I can take a selector and then say fade, hide, apply some CSS, and animate, and do it all in a series with one long string. So that's one of the advantages. With this really simple little example of jQuery here, you're going to notice that this first line indicates that we're going to apply the jQuery to the whole document, the document being the page that you're loading. And the ready function is simply once the page loads. So if you've learned any JavaScript, that's the equivalent of window on load. So this, as soon as the document is loaded, then we will go ahead and execute this function. And what this function is one that will attach to a paragraph. When that paragraph is clicked, we will run this anonymous function which does what? What would you guess that does? Hides the paragraph, right? So if I come over here and I see that I have 3 paragraphs and I click on one of them, it just disappears. Very, very simplistic. Try doing that with regular JavaScript and you're probably writing like 20, 30 lines of code. It takes a little while to create the same thing. So it gives you a significant power and flexibility. If you're really curious to learn more about jQuery, what I would suggest is you come here to W3 Schools and just play around with it a little bit. And they do all sorts of things. So looks like this one's, okay, that's the one we just did, right? Those are hides, mouse enters. There's some really cool ones. I don't want to spend a lot of time digging, but there's some really cool ones that allow you to go in and do animations and stuff. Well, here we go. I'm looking for the example pages. All right. I really don't want to spend a lot of time digging around here. So if you're curious, they have some really cool ones where you can get things to move and slide and fade and change colors and grow in size and do all sorts of crazy things. But it should give you at least a little bit of an idea of how that works. One of the reasons that jQuery has become super popular is it's another one of these technologies that was heavily embraced by Google when they were doing a lot of development in the early days. So I don't know how much of it they were responsible for writing, but they are huge proponents of it, and it really kind of enabled them to accelerate development on a lot of their user interface components. And a lot of the things that we see happening inside the browser windows when we go to like a lot of the Google applications are really leveraged through jQuery. So keep that in mind as you're working. All right, let's talk about how we get those libraries again. And notice that there's going to be a little bit of a process here. They are writing this set of instructions here, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, based on the fact that you might be using Internet Explorer at some point, in which case you might have some issues with downloads. I'm hoping that most of you are using Chrome or Firefox to do some of these things. And where I want to get us to right now is I want to get us right to the spot where we're going to install some packages. Now, I'm going to demonstrate Nougat, and then I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about the thing I just scrolled over really quick, which is the Package Manager console. Because these days Visual Studio has a graphical tool built in that allows us to install things like jQuery with a couple button clicks. In the past, the only way to do that was to drop down to a command prompt inside of Visual Studio, type a cryptic series of commands. If you knew them, usually you would Google them, and then it would do the same work. But it's not quite so user-friendly. But that approach does exist. All right, let's go ahead and open up our folder where we're doing our work. Oh, wrong class. And I'm assuming this is the site we're working on. Let us hope. Well, if it turns out to be the wrong one, of course, we'll have to take care of that. I'm going to rename this, of course, and please try to be in the habit of versioning your work. And I'm going to say that this is Chapter 10 complete, I hope, because I'm not entirely sure, honestly. All right, so yeah, I don't want to go in that folder. I am going to be working on the site folder. I just want a backup of where I'm at. All right, so go ahead and open Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 2015 this semester, and I guess next year when I do this class in the spring, if I'm doing it, it'll be 2017. Is it? All right. I've had pretty good experiences so far with 2017, but I haven't maybe pushed it that hard to find out. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our site. You guys know how to do that by this point in time, I hope. All right, so we have a bunch of pages that are open. And I'm going to pull my instructions off to the side screen here. All right. To activate the Nougat package manager, probably the best way to do it is just go to the root of your site, give it a right click, and then notice about 7, 8 entries down there how it says Manage Nougat Packages. So go ahead and click that. And the thing that's important to understand here is basically we're adding functionality to our website by pulling in some tools. Now notice that it recognizes that I already have the Modernizer installed because that kind of got built with the project, and that's pretty common. But we want to do a browse. So if you get a screen that looks like mine, click on Browse. And then, now Jquery does appear right in the first screen because it is that popular, and that's what they put here on the first page usually. And you can see there's other tools like Bootstrap and the Entity Framework, and if you scroll down, some of the other real common tools that people add. So all it really takes to install it is to click on it and hit install. But what I want to show you how to do when you are looking for things that are a little bit more obscure is to don't ignore that search window. Just come up here and type Jquery, and then it will automatically narrow things down. Now, all of a sudden, you have a whole lot more to choose from, right? And I'm not going to have you choose anything other than the first one. But I just want you to be aware of the fact that there's all sorts of Jquery tools, and there's different versions. So for example, notice that there's ones that are focused on user interface components, other ones that are built for validation, surprise, surprise, because it's a real common thing to do. Working with data, ones that are built for mobile. So there's entire mobile libraries, so there's user interface components where you can create little expanding panels and all these little buttons that you see in a lot of mobile apps and websites that you're like, oh, that's really cool. How'd they do that? Well, here's the trick. They're using Jquery Mobile to generate it automatically. They just put in a couple little tags in their code and their HTML, and it just happens. So that's part of the fun of this, folks. All right, so let's go ahead and choose that first one. And then notice here before you click install, I know you guys probably already clicked install, I'm sure, right? That you are able to actually pick the versions that you're going to use. And there are many versions, and some of them do have different capabilities. What I want you to pay attention to is that the book, when they're using the Jquery libraries, that book is like a snapshot in time. I don't know what version of the libraries they have here. It might be something like 1.9 or something really old like that. And all the examples that they're building are built on top of that. It should be that everything that we do, even if we use the latest version, should work. But if you run into issues, that might be one of the issues. The other thing you should be aware of is that once you add these libraries, the version numbers get encoded in the script strings. And I'll show you that once they're installed. Because if you start copying code from the book and it has jQuery 1.8 or something and you're using 3.3, you're going to have a little bit of an issue and it's not going to see it. So just something to be aware of. I am going to use the latest stable release. I don't see any reason not to. So go ahead and click install and then say OK. And then basically what this is doing is it's going out to wherever the online repository is, and it's downloading it and it's adding it to the project. Once it's installed as a package like it is now, you can actually go in here and do updates from this interface too, which, believe me, is much easier than the package manager console. So you guys have that? Everybody did it okay? All right, if you come over to your Solution Explorer on the right-hand side and you scroll down and you go to the folder named Scripts and you expand it, now if you look inside, you're going to see that there's a collection of jQuery files here. And I'm actually going to go ahead and click on the main library, which is the one that's just entitled jQuery 3.11js. So if you click on that and just take a look inside, you're going to see that if you scroll down, I don't know how many lines of code there are, but I guess there's over 10,000. That was a pretty good guess, like I kind of knew. Right, well, I kind of know. So, but you can see it's just a JavaScript file. It's got a lot of stuff in it. A lot of comments. But every time your site loads, if you're pulling in this file, it's got to load all 10,000 lines of that code every time your page runs. That's a lot of code, right? So what a lot of people will do is they'll use the min version of the same library, and that's minified. So I'm going to click on that and you can see what that looks like. All right. Now guess what? This is the exact same code. All the comments, white spaces, tabs, indents, things have been changed to like simplified names. So instead of using like a whole name for something, they just use a letter or a couple letters. And it's all done automatically, and it's squeezed down to, well, guess what? It's only on one. No, it's like 4 lines of code, 4 lines of code. But really, it's probably like 3,000. I think it's something like that, the equivalent. But the computer doesn't care, right? And this will load significantly faster than that full-blown library. Notice that there's other libraries that come with, ones that are trimmed down even further. So if you know you're only using certain features, you can actually target certain libraries that are more stripped down and therefore will run faster. One of the strategies, though, folks, if you are linking to, let's say, the Google libraries, like W3 Schools was, is a lot of websites use those libraries. So if like you have your browser open, you've been browsing all day, chances are Google's jQuery libraries already loaded in the cache on your machine, or maybe even in memory. So when using their library, it'll load that much faster when you're working with pages. So that's one strategy. However, you always have to worry about version differences, especially when you're using cutting-edge features. So pros and cons to weigh. All right, so that's the Nougat Package Manager, and that's the first try it out exercise. And I don't think they have us do anything further there. Now, if you go back to the book and you scroll up, remember I told you I promised you I'd go back up. Visual Studio, prior to having the Nougat Package Manager, although this tool still exists, the tool to use was the Package Manager console. And the way you get to it is going to this directory, or this menu location. So Tools, Library Package Manager. So Tools, Library Package Manager. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Right, but see it's called something else now? So they really want you to use the Nougat Package Manager is really kind of what's happening here in the newer versions. The instructions in the book are the ones that work for 2012, that version of Visual Studio. But if you click the console, it does bring up this window here at the bottom of your screen, and then you have to know the right commands. So you can follow the commands that are in the book to get whatever package it is you need. And there are some packages out there, just so you know, that the only way that you can install them with one of these automated tools is from the command line. If you're going to that trouble and really all that's happening is you're copying files from an external website to your website, you can do that manually too. It's just that convenience of having that automatic tool. All right, now the author goes through a whole little discussion kind of covering the things that I've talked about already, and that is the different ways to pull it in. But if you are going to be pulling in jQuery, you will need to have a script file or script link basically in the head section of your HTML documents or your master pages or your base page. Okay, if you want it included on every page. Does not have to be on every page, but that's something to know. Another way to do it is to actually use the ASP style script call, which runs server-side, and in some ways is considered perhaps a little bit more efficient, and that's really very subjective. I'm going to say that. Frankly, you know, students always say, well, what do I do when I'm developing? I tend to use the Google libraries because I hate having to go through the process of downloading the stuff and adding it to the folders. And in the past I did that because I didn't want to waste disk space on my web host because it costs a lot of money. Now most of them give you unlimited space or so much doesn't matter. But I also find that it runs faster. And for me, that's enough of a reason why to use it. The book does not demonstrate that, I don't think, in actuality. All right, let's move on to this next exercise now. They do want us to go to the front-end master. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to come through and I'm going to start closing some of my already open tabs, the files, and you can see there's many of them. And I knew the front-end master was open here somewhere, so that's why I'm doing that. All right, so if you have your front-end master open, get into Markup view if you're not in Markup view. And then they want us to look for the script manager control, and that's this right here. Remember we added that in one of the previous chapters. And I'm going to make a little space in between here, and I'm going to add the code from the book. And here's your first gotcha that I was warning you about. Okay, and the spot where I think some people will have problems at home, at least initially. Yeah, you see it, right?
Yeah, I had to change that with mine.
Right. So, wow, yeah, this book was printed a while ago, version 1.72. But really, jQuery has gone through that many version changes, even in the last year or two. They've really gone through a lot of version changes. So what we need to do is match that number with the number that we have here. So we want to change that to 3.11. And it's got to be exact. It cannot be sort of. And also notice that they are using the minified version, and you should leave that alone. All right. I'm going to do a little indenting here to clean it up. I know Visual Studio will do it for me eventually, but go ahead and save that. All right, we're going to create a new file now, a new web form inside the demos folder just to do a little demonstration. So come up to your demos folder, give it a right click, do an add a new web form. They're not saying anything here about basing it upon our base page, so I'm assuming that we don't need to. So let's just choose a regular old web form, and let's give its name. Does it? Oh, it does say do it on your custom template. Okay, so don't listen to the teacher. Read the book. So we're going to do add new item, and by now you guys are so familiar with this process. We're going to build off of our base page. And we're going to call it Jquery. You notice with Jquery the Q is capital, not the J. .aspx. Right away they want to make sure that we set our title to Jquery demo, because otherwise we've already learned that if we don't put a title in, it doesn't really like it too much. Right? We've run into that one numerous times. Alright, it says with the new page open in Markup view, we're going to put the following code into the CP main content block. So we're going to add some code right here. And this is the code. And I'm going to highlight that and do a format selection so it's a little easier to see. All right, so let's just analyze that really quick before we move on to the next step. The first thing that you should see is that we're adding an input control that's a button. Apparently we're going to use that button somehow. And then we're adding a script section, and remember with JavaScript, or if you haven't had JavaScript yet, what you should know about JavaScript is capable of running in a lot of different ways. One way that you can run JavaScript is to take script sections and put it in the head section of an HTML document. And that's one of the ways you're typically taught, either if you're linking to an external one or running the scripts right there. You can also run it in line with the HTML. That's basically what we're doing here. Or it can be in a separate file. It can also attach itself to the event handlers of HTML objects. So for example, if I were to create a form, I could place an action tag on that form that would point to a jQuery function. Just, and you can do the same with JavaScript. And those of you that have had JavaScript as a class or two should know this already. All right, so we have a script section, and then inside there, once again, we see this document ready function. Remember what that does is it just waits for the page to load. Once it's loaded, then it goes ahead and triggers these little activities. And basically, the first one, notice, is going to attach itself to anything that's got the ID of main content. Where's that? Somewhere. Do we know where that is? Well, it's in the CSS file, but it's part of our page structure. Remember, we're looking at a web form that's being built on top of our custom template, and that custom template pulls in all this stuff automatically, and we just have the tags here that we're inserting stuff into. But somewhere on our page structure there is an ID main content. And then notice, what do you suppose this does? I mean, that's pretty easy to figure out, isn't it? We're going to apply CSS, this is the style, and this is the property, to main content. So we're going to change the background color to green. And then we're going to have a button named button 1, that's right here, that when we click, that main content ID is now going to have different CSS. It's going to turn to the background red by clicking the button. In addition, we're chaining onto that an animate, which is changing the width and the height. So we're going to change the color, and we're going to change the size real simply. And see how simple the syntax is. That's really the point here. Okay, make sure you save this. So do a Control S to save. Don't lose your work. And then let's go ahead and bring this up in the browser and see what happens. And I know I already did a boo-boo because, oh no, actually, it's good. That's a formal word, by the way, boo-boo. All right, so there's our button. Go ahead and give it a click, and hopefully it changes to red and becomes narrow. Well, hey, it won't go back. Well, we didn't code it to go back. We just coded it to do one thing. If we refresh it, it should load the green again because that's where it starts. But you see how cool that is. Did you notice that not only did it change size, right, but it animated the size change. It figures out where it was and where it's going to, and it does it dynamically. It just changes. You can add a sound. Believe it or not, you can add a sound to that. I'm not sure if you really want to, but I'm not sure if that's in good taste, but you could if you wanted. All right, so that was the second try it out. So we're doing pretty good. Making some good progress. All right, bringing the book back over onto the screen here. And they start talking about the syntax again, and I know I've kind of given you guys a little bit of a preview out of sequence with the book, which is fine, because then I think it hopefully reinforces it. The one thing that we learned, of course, is that the $sign. The $sign is the tip that we're running jQuery. Okay. We learned about the document ready function. We also learned about anonymous functions. Those are ones that don't have names, but they still execute. We learned about selectors. So whatever goes inside those parentheses, inside quotes, single or double, doesn't matter, would be the same CSS selector that you would use for CSS. Exact same thing. And that was done consciously. That alone, that part of it there, saves probably like 20 characters, because in order to do that, for example, if I wanted to get a selector with regular JavaScript for H2, I'd have to say get element by tag name, and then include the tag name. I mean, I don't know how many characters that is, but that's a savings of characters right there. All right. We already saw how we can apply some simple CSS. So if you know your CSS commands, it's pretty easy to drop them in here. It doesn't take much, right? And a lot of times what we use this jQuery for is just to change the appearance of things. But the other component is that chaining. So we have the selector dot some sort of a method or function, depending on how you look at it, that does something. And then we're chaining another one onto it. And what do you suppose this one would do? Well, it fades the object out. So if something's on the screen, over the course of 5 seconds, 5,000 milliseconds, it fades out and disappears. If you guys remember your CSS selectors, the star, of course, is the universal selector. That's a tag name, H2. Here's one that's an ID. You can apply it to a class. Notice this is kind of a fun one. You can actually use jQuery to dynamically add a class to an object. So let's say I had a class that I called just red, and all I did with it is say color red. And then I use my jQuery to add the class to a tag that previously didn't have it. I now take that paragraph that was black text and change it to red by using that simple line of jQuery. That's a powerful thing. Simple but powerful. All right, so the class selectors. Yes, you can do multiple selectors. And as I was alluding to before, you can use all the weird, complicated CSS syntax you can think of inside those double quotes. It will work. All right, so the next exercise we're going to work on here is working with basic selectors, but we are at a point, I think, that it's a good time to take a break before we do this. So let's take 5 and come back and resume. And we're going to start working on this next try it out, which is at the very bottom of 398, top of 399. And you can see the first step here is they want us to open up the front end master, markup view, and we're going to insert some code. Let's pull this off to the side and do exactly that. So here's my front end master. We are in markup view. And then this is way towards the bottom here because it's past the footer. So they want this basically placed after the closing div tag, but before the closing form tag. And what we're doing is we're placing an ASP placeholder here. And you can see already they gave it an ID with an intent that we are going to put some sort of a script. So they want us to actually close this. But keep in mind that when we're putting in a placeholder, that allows us then on our pages that are generated automatically based upon the front end master, that will have that component added to it as a spot where we can add things. One thing that's really common in JavaScript, and depending on how you learn JavaScript, or if you have, and I'm making the assumption that you guys should have had JavaScript by now, but you might not have. Knowing that JavaScript can run as an inline script, in other words, right in line with your HTML. One thing that we often do as coders is sometimes instead of putting those JavaScript links at the top of the document or right in line with stuff, sometimes we'll put the call to the libraries and certain components at the very bottom of the page with the intent that we want the rest of the document to be completely finished loading first before we execute a script. In theory, the document ready function should take care of that, but there are situations where we want to trigger one thing before another, and often that's a good way to ensure that it happens. So it's not unusual to actually even see calls to the Jquery library at the bottom of a page, or calls to certain Jquery functions at the bottom of a page, because we want them to load before we run that script on it. And it just helps to ensure that. So that's the why if you're curious. Once again, we're going to create a new demo page. So let's go to the demos folder. And this time I have to assume we're going to do it with our custom template. Is that what it says? Yep, based on your own template. So let's right click, add, new item, my base page. And this time we are calling it basic selectors. Maybe we should give it a title right away. I don't know if the book says that, but we're doing it now. Good practice. It says give it a meaningful title. That's the instruction. They want us to jump over to Design View and then locate that section that we just added. And that's actually right here. So you see that there's this box. We can't edit in too many spots, but this is one spot where we can edit. And they actually want us now, oh, I see what they're, okay, so I'm reading the instructions, that's why I'm kind of pausing here. But they want us to use the Smart Tasks panel, so we're going to use this little arrow here, and then we're going to create some custom content. Then with the next step, they want us to come over to the markup view, which I guess I'm struggling a little bit with their instructions. Why do they have us do create custom content and then switch to markup view? All right. So here I'm reading, it says, switch to markup view and add the following HTML to the CP main content area, which is up here. So they want us to add this h1 in a div that you see in step 5 on page 399. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's drop that in. We got h1 in a div. I'll do a little indenting for beautification. But now in the script section down here, they want us to add the code from step 6. I am going to highlight and format because I think that really helps to see things clearly. All right, so notice with this one, we do not have the document ready function in place. And what's going to happen here is this is a function without a name that is just going to run. All right. What is it going to do? It's going to go through and it's going to apply, well, a couple different things. The first thing it's going to do, it's going to use the universal selector and it's going to apply the color green to all the text on the page. Yes, that will be very hard to look at. For the sidebar, we're going to add a border bottom, 2 pixels solid red. With H1, we're going to bind a click event handler. That's what this indicates. That when clicked on that H1, it will throw up an alert box, if you know your JavaScript. We're also going to add a class to something called sample class. I think that's the thing we have right here, where it's going to add that class please wait. I'm not sure what please wait does, but I'm sure it does something. And then it hides it. That sounds fun. Then it looks like the footer and the header are going to slide up slowly and slide down slowly. Isn't that fun? And then the sidebar image is going to fade for 5,000 seconds to 0.1. What do you think 0.1 might be? Wild guess. Opacity, maybe? Transparency, opacity, same thing. 2 different words for the same concept. All right, let's go ahead and save it. Let's hit the play button and see what happens. See if we anticipated all the things that are going to happen. See it bounce? See the ugly text color? See the red? What else happened? If I click the H1, all right, we got to look at that whole list of things. So here's the whole list of things again. Color green, sidebar border bottom. Okay, the click function, we already showed that one. We added a class to please wait and then it hid. And that's the part, well, I guess we're not seeing it. We probably want to refresh to see that. Let's refresh. Right here. And then it goes away. Then also notice the other one, as we anticipated, the sidebar image faded to 10% opacity after 5 seconds. So let's just refresh the page one more time, watch all those different actions. See that fading? A lot of silly little effects, and this is all for demonstration. It really has no practical purpose for anything we're doing. But you can see jQuery is kind of fun, right? Now we're at the very bottom of page 399, top of 401, and we're going to do the next section. All right. Back over to Visual Studio, and let's go ahead and we're going to create another new demo page based on our template. So once again, add new item, my base page. And this time, the name we're going to give it is Jquery Demos, plural. Capital Q, capital D. Let's give it some sort of a title like Jquery Demos. And then we're going to find the content placeholder for the main content section, this area. And they have some code in the book here that's basically an H1, an H2, a table, and some form fields, which I'm pasting right now. And let's go ahead and highlight and format that. So once you've got it pasted in and formatted, it should look something like this. And basically, an H1, a table with some dummy content in it, an H2, notice it's got a span in there, and then we have a button, a text field, and a couple of checkboxes. And as you can imagine, we're going to make them do something, which is the fun part. All right, so moving on to step number 2. Now, they want us to go ahead and add a content block for the client script. Now, do you guys remember how we did that previously? Well, we copy-pasted, I think, right? Well, that's what we're doing again. So we're going to add this, and just throw it down here at the bottom. Once again, I'm going to format my code. All right, and then they want us to start replacing this example code with this one to start with. So let's try this. All right, so without being an expert on jQuery, especially if you're completely brand new to this, this library, can you guys tell me what's going to happen? Right. So the table, right, demo table, maybe this one. So ID of demo table, the background color for that's going to be green. So let's go ahead, let's make sure that's the case. Let's go ahead and run it. Not very exciting, but it does work. All right, and then they want us to jump back over here and then use the Control-Z key combination to basically undo what we just dropped in, because apparently they have other plans for us. So we're going to follow along with their instructions. Now, the next section here, as we move on to page 402, finishing off the exercise, what they're trying to demonstrate to us is the fact that we can use those more advanced CSS selectors here. And you know, this isn't a class necessarily in learning CSS, but here are some of the ones that we can add. These extended selectors, some people will call them pseudo selectors, they can do a lot of cool things. So, I mean, what would you guess first does? Well, it says right there, it enables you to select the first or last item in a match set. So if I have like a table, and the table's got a bunch of rows, and I apply it to tr:first, it's going to apply to the first instance of that and whatever is attached to it. Same with last. And then you can apply it to odd and even rows. And I'm using that as an example because that's what they're doing. Or you can look at things like this, where you actually put in equals, or it's less than or greater than a particular index value. So in other words, as the rows appear in the table, the first index value will be 0, and then it counts up. So I can actually say, let's say greater than index maybe 2. So the first 3 rows wouldn't have it, but the ones that follow do. So you see how that works? And that way you can actually target pretty specific little things. All right, so lots of little tools like that. Notice that they also have a lot of other advanced ones, and these are actually what we call filters. So we actually are kind of stepping away from actual CSS syntax now, and we're using jQuery specific syntax. That's the implication here. All right. So you can see that we can actually target pretty specific things, and this is kind of fun. So just to contemplate, like if you find something that contains a certain snippet of text, and you can put that text in there. So if somebody says Trump, right, you can make it all bold. You can make it huge. That was a really bad joke. And you know what will be funny is like a year from now, nobody will think it's funny. But now it's funny. Okay, so take your time and look through some of these filters and some of the things that you can do because they can be pretty helpful for like really narrowing down what you're applying an effect to. All right, so next section we jump into here is talking about the DOM. What is the DOM? What does DOM stand for? Yes, the Document Object Model. It is basically an API that allows us to narrow down specific elements of a web page, all the way from the window itself to the document within it. You can look at even the history that you've gone through and the browser metadata. So you can probe and discover what browser you're using, an operating system for that matter. But then you can also go through all the structure of the actual page, everything from the HTML tag to the body tag to a paragraph to something with specific ID or certain attributes like we've been looking at. So the fun part of jQuery is we can like mess with the CSS, but we can also mess with the actual structure. We can actually create stuff through jQuery just like you can with JavaScript. So you can create tags, you can destroy tags, you can modify the tags and their attributes. So that's what this section is about. So some of the ones that we would work with here, the CSS methods, which we've already seen, where we would take like the name of the property and then whatever value we want to throw at it. That's actually a method that basically takes whatever we throw at it and puts it into CSS and then manipulates it as such. And they go through it here and they explain how those work. I think one of the ones they're going to show us here coming up are some of these where you add a class, remove a class, and toggle a class. And you know how like we made that one box like shrink, change red and shrink down? If we would add, for example, a toggle to it, we could attach it to that button and then it would go back. And what's really fun about that one is many years back I spent, I can't tell you, like weeks trying to figure out this little thing. I was writing a ticket purchase page for like this event, and I wanted to give students special pricing. So if they entered in their ID number and hit a button, they'd get the special pricing window that would pop up. But then, people could hit that and still see it, but I wanted it to be able to go back, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. It took me weeks of research to find this toggle. And then when I figured it out, it was like such a relief, so. All right, so, all right. Another thing that's very slick about working with jQuery is the way that it handles events. In JavaScript, we have event handlers that attach naturally through the JavaScript API to objects on the screen, whether you have them enabled to react to it or not. But a real simple thing that you can do is throw in little JavaScript like this where you go on click and you trigger some code. And jQuery has a slightly different approach to that, and that is by using this bind command. Now basically this is one statement even though it's like moved over to the other line, but we can bind to whatever events that we could bind to with JavaScript, same events, and then we can use those to trigger, in this case, in the example, an anonymous function. And we can apply those on the fly to whatever components we choose just by virtue of changing the selector. right? So that's kind of the point there. They go through and they show some additional little things here, and I'm trying to point out highlights here. This is kind of interesting too. Whenever you see this inner HTML thing, that's the ability to change the HTML of the element that you're dealing with. So if you had a paragraph, you could actually go in there and change its contents with jQuery using that inner HTML, just like you would in JavaScript. All right, they talk about a couple common things here. Just remember that since we're using CSS style selectors, they are just as picky as they are for CSS, so they are case sensitive. You need the pound sign for IDs, the dot for classes, and you have to have those there in order to work. Some of this stuff we kind of played with a little bit already, but they talk about some of the visual effects that you can accomplish with jQuery. Show and hide are some of them. The toggle command, that's one that that's one that turns it on and off with without having to write two separate pieces of code. So you can move things by sliding. You can fade in and out. You can animate them. We've kind of seen all of these to some degree already. And they do talk about some of the parameters of that. But apparently we have a purpose for this, and our purpose is to basically apply this type of effect to our contact form. So we are at the top of page 410, and we are going to work on this next exercise here. And I think we're getting close to the end of the chapter, and hopefully we can finish before we end. All right, so we are going to go to our contact form Aspx page, and that's in the controls folder. So this user control that we created. And we are looking for something with the ID of message. Since I know there's a whole bunch of stuff here, and I think this is the one that we want to find, right? Yep, right down here. So I'm down towards the bottom of the page, and what they want us to do is actually add a CSS class to this, and you can add that anywhere, but I'm going to put it right here at the end. So I'm going to say CSS Class equals attention. So I'm just adding it to this label with the ID of message. Everything else will stay the same. Now, I'm thinking that my page isn't completely complete here, but you guys see that I seem to be missing a little bit of code. Hopefully that's not problematic. It's probably an exercise I skipped over. And this is where it's good to actually read the instructions, folks, right? Because it's actually asking us to add that paragraph that follows. So I'm going to do that. So they actually want us to place this directly after this section. So they want us to throw in a paragraph, and apparently we're going to use that to trigger some content. Then they want us to find the table that holds the form. So by doing that, we're going to go all the way up to the top here. And they want us to wrap that in a div tag. And the div tag, I'm just going to type this one in. I'm going to give it an ID of table wrapper. And then I'm going to take that closing tag and put it at the very bottom of the table tag. Just scroll way down here. Okay, so that seems okay. In step number 3 now, we're at the bottom of page 410. The author goes into a little bit of a discussion about the fact that in older versions of Visual Studio we did not have IntelliSense for things like jQuery and JavaScript, but we can actually leverage that in. So there's instructions there for doing that. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the scripts folder, and in the scripts folder we're going to add a JavaScript file. And this file is going to be called _ references, all lowercase, .js. And then it says from the scripts folder, drag the jQuery file into this file. So I'm just going to grab my jQuery, the main one, the one that's just a 3.11, just drop it in here. And notice what it does is it gives us that reference path. It puts it in basically as a comment, but it is used in the code. And then what this will do is it will automatically look for the IntelliSense version of the script file that's here in the folder. And then this JavaScript file will allow Visual Studio to intelligently guess what you're typing and give you an option of things, just like you do with a lot of your other code. So that's kind of a fun little tool if you didn't know that one. All right, I'm on step number 4 now. I'm going to save this reference.js and probably save all of these. But back to the contact form. And it wants us to go all the way down to the end of the file here. And it wants us to add this jQuery code and script element. So grab the code from the book. Paste that in. If you want to go ahead and format it, that's not a bad idea. Keep it looking nice. And notice they do have a comment in here where we're expecting to add more stuff. The remainder of the code, the stuff from step 5, is listed in step 5. And what this is going to do, as we paste it in, you can read the description in the book. It's going to do a number of different little animations all within it. We also need to add a little bit of code to the code behind, so let's go ahead and find the code behind for contact form Aspx. Let's open that up. And then we need to add a little bit of code, and this needs to be attached to the send button click method. So here it is. And they do give us a spot to place it, and I think that is, they want it placed right here. Yeah, and I'm just reading the instructions carefully to make sure that we're not messing this up. So I'm going to go ahead and do a save all at this point. Save both the code behind and the main page. Now we're going to jump up to our Monochrome CSS file. So we're into the app themes folder, Monochrome, and Monochrome CSS. And we're going to take this code that's in step 8, top of page 412, and we're going to copy it, probably just put it right at the bottom. Frankly, it doesn't matter where you put it, but this is where they're asking, so that's where we're putting. And then I'll indent that stuff. Save it. And then we're going to take the same block of code and we're going to put it in the dark gray theme as well. So once again, way at the bottom of the file. And save it. All right, next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and check the site. Let's bring that site up and see what happens. Now, we want to go to the Contact Us page, right, to get the form. And then it wants us to actually fill the form in. And then watch what happens when you hit the send button. Ooh, fancy. Makes you feel like you did something, right? Thank you, Jquery. Really made our life easier. But it is a neat effect. And then depending on what you do and how you code this, you can create some nice little effects. But it does show the user that something's happening, and it does grab their attention, which I think is helpful. Now, according to step 9, according to step 11, it also should have showed me a message that said that message was sent. Did yours do that? Okay, well, if it did, I wasn't paying attention, so maybe I'm gonna do this all over again. Okay, and then the point is that this will go away eventually. And that's the part. That was kind of neat. Right. Earlier chapters we learned a little bit about validation, and you probably have learned in maybe in this class and other classes that very often before we'll send stuff off to a server for validation, we'll try to do some validation in the browser either with HTML5 or JavaScript, and in this case with jQuery. But in order to get jQuery validation to work in what they call unobtrusive jQuery validation, you need to make sure that you enable it in the web config file, and then you have to register the jQuery library in this particular global file to make it work. And notice that it says right here that the global ASCX file is a special type of file that you put in the root of your project that can hold certain parameters that we use to make things happen. One of the things that it enables is some of the error checking components related to the validation, so that's why we do that. All right, so they want us to start here with step 1 by opening Contact Aspx, so I'm going to move this off here once again. So let's find that one. So there's our page. And then they want us to go ahead and open it in the browser right away for some reason, so let's humor them and do exactly that, just so we can see what it looks like. Then they want us to do a right-click View Source. And then they want us to locate the input field for the username, and you can probably do a search here, but see if you can find it manually. But I'm going to cheat. All right, well, probably smarter to look for the the ID, which is CP main content, and it's only one of 121 instances of it, right? Maybe we should narrow that down. Contact form. Oh, that's only one of 112. And then required. Okay, so that's getting a little better. But we're looking for required field validator 1, so there it is. So this is the one I'm looking for. And for me, it's on line 170. All right, so they just want you to be able to find it, for one thing. And then it says scroll down to the end of the code until you see a large chunk of JavaScript code that's responsible for the validation. All right, and that I think is down here somewhere. All right, here we go. All right, and what they're trying to point out is that for every control, you're going to notice there's kind of like a redundant set of validation that's happening. So for every single one, we're kind of loading the same code over and over and over again. All right, and part of our goal is to kind of overcome this scenario. So I'm back up on step 5 now, page 415. So they want us to right-click the root of the project here, add new item. And then we want to find the global application class item. Best way to find it is to go up to the search window. I got to spell it right though. And we do want C#. So select that. And you're going to notice that you can change the name of this, but the book very clearly indicates you don't have to enter a name because the default of global Aspx is the only name allowed for this file. So if you put in a different name, guess what happens? It doesn't work. Because it's a special file that it requires to be in a certain format. So you just basically leave that alone. Go ahead and click Add. All right. Now you're going to notice inside here there's a number of different methods already listed, and they want us to start by adding some code up here. Oh, so now I'm copying the code from step 6 and adding it to the start method. So I'm just going to replace this comment. Let's do a little formatting there. That wasn't very nice. And that's a little bit better. Please be mindful of the fact that the jQuery version number here is not going to match what we have. Ours, remember, was 3.11, so 3.11. Yes, you must spell it correctly. That is required. Control S to save. Okay, now we're going to go down to our web config file. Way at the bottom here. And inside here, there's a section that's called App Settings, and we are going to add this little snippet of code. And basically really what it's having us do is making sure that we have this present. If for some reason that did not get added, that's a problem. All right, so if it's not added, copy and paste it in. But I think they want us to change it. Yeah, value should be changed to web forms. So let's change that. Now, one thing that you should make note of, if for some reason it doesn't work, because a lot of the stuff happens automatically in Visual Studio, this would be one spot where we might come back because we're doing something that's different than what was automatically generated. So that should be a mental note. If you want to take it a step further, you could even put in a comment in here and say, hey, this is the spot where we made a change that I'm not really sure if I should have made that change. So that's not a bad idea. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go to the master page. So let's find our front end master. And then we need to find the script section that they're identifying. That should be in the script manager. That's probably up top here somewhere. All right, right here. And we're going to change the reference to the Jquery library, and it's going to point to what we just created in the global file. So basically, this whole section here is just going to be adjusted. So instead of saying script reference and the path, we're going to switch this out. So it just says name equals Jquery. And what that's going to basically do is it's going to look at that global Aspx file for a pointer as to where it's supposed to go. That's the why. And then there's a further why that the author points out. He goes, if you didn't make this change, Jquery would be included twice on the pages that use validation controls. Once from the global and once from here, but now we're making it attach just to the one. All right, so go ahead, save the page, and it says go ahead and bring up the contact page in the browser. So let's launch the site again. Go to the contact form. Don't fill the form out, just click the send button, and they just want to show you that validation works still, because basically we haven't changed it. All right. The main point that they're trying to make here is like if you do a right-click view source, that all that redundant JavaScript that we were looking at before should now be gone. So that was kind of like the whole point of what we did here. Believe it or not, that wraps the chapter, folks. So we learned a lot of different things. We learned about what Jquery is, how to include it, how to work with the Nougat package manager, how to